Hello, hello, hello. All right, we're gonna do a brief Periscope. And by that I mean, in my concept of brevity, we're looking at about 45 minutes. So, big day. So if you care, you may share. The lost concept of sharing Periscopes so that we don't have people informing me that the notifications don't work. I'm well aware that the notifications don't work. I wish I had a better concept and construct to speak to you, but YouTube, I'm going to save that for when, Glenn is producing it. And I've been trying it a couple times, but on my own. And I can't kill the stream for some reason. And every time I kill the stream, it just keeps lagging on and on and on and on. So we got to get that fixed up. So we're looking at about 45 minutes of impeachment intrigue here. So share them out and people can enjoy. I don't know that I'll be answering too many questions. It'll be a stream of consciousness thing here, as I did the other day. So, one, let me introduce myself very briefly to the people that don't know me. See, here's the funny thing about Twitter, Periscope, YouTube. A lot of people have a lot of opinions, and you wonder how they come into those opinions or how they would deduce certain facts to be real or not real. Without real world experience, it's very difficult to ascertain, fact versus fiction when what you're watching is given a different color through the prism, depending on what channel you're watching or what Twitter account you're stopped on. So to people that don't know me, most of you do, my name is Adam Gingrich, and that's a very important component here. My name is Adam Gingrich. I am searchable. I am findable, unfortunately, for my own future prospects. I am what you would call a Republican operative since 2000. That's very important, and this is my face, which is very unfortunate as well. But I used to look a lot better than this when I was a younger man. And I will tell you this: the people that don't show their face, that don't use their name, and try to remain anonymous, and then give you some weighty attachment to the opinions that they're giving you is wrong. So I'm standing behind my opinion. I put them in print all the time on Twitter, and I leave them up for note of record on Periscope and YouTube. If you want to know what I really think or thought at any given time, you will be able to find it. So briefly, by way of introduction to the people that don't know me, or to the people that think they know me but they really don't. Again, my name is Adam Gingrich. I am from central Pennsylvania. I currently reside in the Harrisburg-Hershey region. I have, my first political experience started in the mid-90s when I was in high school, or graduated high school. My mother was a president of Borough Council in small little borough, Palmyra, Pennsylvania. And at that point, I became politically active in order to facilitate her re-elections, facilitate some conditional policies, working in some respect on some subcommittees in that vicinity in Palmyra Borough, and to get other people elected of a like mind so that the council could be constructed the way we wanted it to reflect the values of the community. So I began that undertaken mission in the mid-90s. So at that point, I'm going to college as well. So I'm doing this as I come home in the summer. And I would always come home to vote in the fall and in the spring as well from college, because I didn't trust the absentee ballot process, and I always wanted to vote. And I wanted to make sure that I had a 100% voting record. It's something that I've always ensured since I was 18 years old, because it was an example set to me not only by my parents, but by my maternal grandparents, who were both in receipt of congressional recognition and state recognition for never having missed a vote well into their 90th year. So that has always been very important to me. And this will be over in a minute here for all the people waiting to get to impeachment intrigue. But that story, that arc never stopped for me. The learning never stopped. I was absolutely enthralled with politics since taking AP courses in high school. That transcended into college, where I went into political economics and then continued my education into political science. At that point, I had already been working on congressional campaigns and started in the year 2000 with George Gekas, the late George Gekas. And that really took off in 2002 when I ran my mother's first campaign for the House of Representatives here in Pennsylvania. And I also was a part of the George Gekas hardcore election against a redistrict of Tim Holden, which unfortunately we lost. My first taste of defeat in politics was 2002. Since then, I have done everything that you could possibly imagine. And can't even describe how many congressional races and House races and Senate races I've been a part of. I've been a part of the presidential re-elect campaigns in a voluntary role in 2004, in a much larger role in 2008, and then in a fairly sizable role in 2012 before working in conjunction with the Trump campaign in 2016. I've been a former county chairman in Lebanon County, Pennsylvania. I have been elected into local office at the borough council level. I have worked not only inside the Pennsylvania General Assembly for 7.5 years. I worked as an executive appointee, as a director of operations for the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources on behalf of Governor Tom Corbett. I did that for about 4 years. I have run the state Senate campaign committee field operations all over the state. I've been running Senate campaigns. I've ran House campaigns since 2006. So all that goes into just a little bit of a jumbled ball of knowledge. And that, coupled with my obsession to learn more about the Richard Milhouse Nixon era, not only encompassing the impeachment efforts, the fallout from the Watergate break-in in 1972, but more or less his entire career as laid out as a fascinating study for me in domestic foreign policy achievements, which he's not given the proper credit for. So that sets me up well to have an historical understanding of what really occurred in that era of impeachment intrigue. And then moving on to 1998, of course, I am in the throes of political education. And at that point, I was certainly clued in on what was occurring with the House efforts to impeach William Jefferson Clinton. So all these things are a very natural segue for me into what has occurred over the last 3 years. I have been following it closely. If you follow me on Periscope, you know what I've been discussing ever since the president was elected. So that being said, I chuckle at all these anonymous people that write articles and Twitter threads about intrigue that never occurs and arrests that never happen. And they're just silly people, and I really don't have time for them. So I just thought I'd introduce myself. And if they ever want to introduce themselves, that's fine. I would appreciate a little bit of intellectual honesty and tell people who you are, at least. And if you really have no business telling people anything about what's going on in the political business, then you should probably butt the hell out. All you do is really cause confusion in the base. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about Halloween here. We've got Nancy Pelosi going, as I said, full Suicide Squad. I was a little hesitant to believe that they would actually undertake this particular resolution with the language therein, simply because it doesn't work in the favor of transparency. It does not jibe in any way, shape, or form with the previous bipartisan rules determinations made prior to 1973 and 1998 efforts. And that, in fact, just because Andrew Johnson and William Jefferson Clinton are the only two technically impeached presidents does not serve as a real base of understanding, because the whole process was almost at its fruition stage under Nixon before his resignation. So, of course, there are Nixon and impeachment lateral comps that we need to do here. And I just can't tell you enough other than to describe the fact that this 7.5-page resolution basically does not match up at all. There is no, if it were a DNA test, there would be no relations, okay? So by any degree of relativism, the fact that the Democrats are trying to paint this as a transparent process is on its surface laughable, and it's on its subdermal layers even more laughable. It's quite mirthful for a lot of pundits like former Congressman, former Speaker Newt Gingrich, who probably is chuckling to himself thinking, okay, I got off the historical bonehead award here because Nancy Pelosi is forging ahead on an impeachment process without doing the due diligence in order to coalesce the congressional body around rules that are deemed fair. Now, is this problematic for her? Absolutely, it's problematic because it's unrecognizable what occurred today in comparison with anything that occurred in 73 or in 1998. This pathetically skewed process is designed to empower the Intelligence Committee to act as the agency of investigation, almost as if they were trying to recreate a independent counsel report similar to the Starr report that was issued to the Judiciary Committee. So instead of not having an independent counsel, of course, into this Ukrainian matter, Adam Schiff is trying to come across as this it's kind of laughable, but this independent counsel who is going to make these determinations on who should be a witness, who can talk, what questions can be answered, when the president's allowed to have an attorney in the room and when he is not. I mean, all of this is laughable. The Intelligence Committee is not considered a standing committee of substance that should ever be weighing matters as weighty as impeachment. It has never occurred before. The judiciary body is traditionally in receipt of this information for impeachment processes. And let me say this, uncategorically, Nancy Pelosi has humiliated Jerry Nadler. I mean, we're talking, and Jerry Nadler could not be more humiliated than if you showed him in a banana hammock, little pair of swimming shorts in 1998 when he weighed 400 pounds. I mean, he could not be more humiliated if you kicked in a stall while he was taking an enormous dump in the basement of the Capitol. This guy has been extraordinarily undercut by the Speaker. It is horrifying to watch what he has gone through. He has basically been subjugated by Adam Schiff because the previous failures engineered within the Judiciary Committee up to and including Bob Mueller, not even withstanding the John Dean debacle and the Corey Lewandowski debacles. All these types of things are absolutely laughable. He has conducted himself with absolutely no conduct becoming of a congressman, that's for sure. And he appears confused, tired, and he's falling asleep at a regular clip here when he's supposed to be awake and doing a job. So Adam Schiff has taken over as this quasi-independent counsel, which of course is laughable. As Representative Doug Collins, minority chair of the Judiciary Committee, remarked today that Adam Schiff may, in fact, if he wants to act like Ken Starr, then he will be Ken Starr, and they will call him before the Judiciary Committee as the first witness to talk about his report, which of course would be devastating because then Adam Schiff would be forced to answer questions about being on the phone with Ukrainian pranksters telling him that they have naked pictures of the president, and Adam Schiff is asking how he can get that information from them. They will ask questions about how the whistleblower came to talk to Adam Schiff's staff prior to becoming a whistleblower. And then, of course, we all know that it's been widely reported Eric Shalamala is the very partisan whistleblower. In fact, a real Brennan and Obama acolyte. And this is very problematic for Adam Schiff. And he will have to answer all these questions as well under oath or not answer them. And that becomes problematic because it'll be on live television. So they're putting themselves in a position where they just threw into the wind about 26 to 27, depending on the latest polls you want to read, Trump district Democrats who won in 2018. And most of those districts are still above water for the president. And some of them, in fact, about a dozen are significantly above water for the president in approval rating. So it's right away you're moving. On this vote alone, you're moving most of those seats, regardless of what your current polling is. You're moving about 12, maybe up to 15 seats right into toss-up territory or plus Republican-leaning territory. You cannot make this type of vote, which is very partisan. And the only bipartisan aspect of this vote taken today was, in fact, two Democrats, one in southern Jersey and then one in northern Minnesota, both in seats that Trump will in fact, win by a very wide margin again next year. Both of these members are likely going to be defeated, even in spite of their vote against these rules. And I think it's pretty fascinating that you've got the only bipartisanship in this rules process was two Democrats saying no. Nancy Pelosi, in fact, voted herself, which is very rare and unbecoming for a speaker to do. It's usually a sign of desperation to inflate a vote total. She clearly wanted to see it up over 230, and they had to reach across to the spurned little pathetic weasel, Justin Amash, who is considered himself a member of the Seoul Independent Caucus and absolutely lives rent-free. Trump is living rent-free in his head, and he's just a spoiled little boy. So it's laughable that they only got to 232. And frankly, what you're really talking about here is 229, 230 tops. So it's just devastating to the dialogue that this is something that the American people want to see move forward. The polling on this is very similar to what you saw around the time of the Clinton impeachment push in, a couple weeks earlier in October in 1998 than it is now. It's very similar. You look at about 50% of the country favored pursuing additional impeachment proceedings into what the president had in fact done and lied about. But there were about 60% who thought that it was a bad idea to move forward with removing a president with the, lying under oath, maybe type of thing. What's the definition of is? I mean, President Clinton could have been convicted of actual perjury after leaving office because he clearly lied under oath and then admitted to it, which is pretty fascinating. So the president here is looking at a very similar timeline in October, approaching an election. Now, that, of course, was a midterm, and this one is going to be a general, and that, of course, was the second term for William Jefferson Clinton, and this will be the first term for Donald John Trump. So we've got some similarities, but not really equal in terms of electoral measure. And so I look at this and I look at the polling, and particularly the swing state polling, which is consistent now, underwater 10% on impeachment and removal in the 10 states that you need to win. And I think when you look at the national polling, it's kind of skewed because national polling is always going to oversample the Democrats, and they're not going to worry about likely voters. They're just going to call any swinging dick that'll answer the phone. And they're really trying to get the 18-year-old 29 dynamic because they're much more likely to respond in either way. That sure, go ahead and check into this type of deal. So the polling is, in fact, very similar. The only thing that's not similar is the partisan divide in this country is much more intense than it was in prior administrations. So naturally, Bill Clinton was sitting on a tech bubble, and he was still in the middle of it, and we still had a very nice expansion of wealth in this country. And I would say it was about similar to what the markets are doing right now as far as growth, and people were very happy with everything. And frankly, the only violence that was going on were some, tail wagging the dog with Clinton bombing in Iraq right around the time that he's getting impeached, which is another story altogether. But, it was pretty high. We're talking about 68, 69% approval rating, which is pretty high to move forward with impeachment. And I think that that's not something that we're looking at in a corollary fashion with Donald Trump. We're looking at about 48 to 50% if you marry together the most respectable tracking polls. And, they're not really going to move up or down that much. So the most of the public is not in favor of this removal. Most of the public will give a nod to impeachment proceedings simply because they figure, hey, if somebody sees smoke, why not check and see if there's fire? But when you get to the removal portion of the polling, it drops like a stone because simply you cannot remove a president for anything that is not a high crime, treason, or a pretty serious misdemeanor. We don't have that here. We have a political crime. The implication being that this is a political crime, and we have no smoking gun, and we actually have the end of the novel, as I said, has already been printed. It's already been printed. The smoking gun is the transcript of the call. There will be no witness who says, I was instructed by the president to withhold aid to the Ukraine until they investigate Joe Biden or his son. That will not happen. There is no direct connection to the president on that. It is all theory. It is all these Russia hardliners that were employed to the NSC And I think that the Trump administration bears the guilt of one thing and the one thing only that led to this, and that is really, really bad gateway hiring processes. We let in a whole bunch of ridiculously young and politically connected to never Trumpers and some outright Democrats that we allowed to. It's basically the NSC was a rat's nest. It was an absolute rat's nest. And now I have some commiseration value for Bannon leaking like a sieve and trying to insert himself onto the NSC because it was that bad that he felt that he needed to call attention to it. So I'm not really letting him off the hook for the way he conducted himself while he was in the White House, but I will give Steve Bannon a little bit of a hat tip because he was willing to go so far as to commit crimes of leaking information to the media because he saw that the NSC was an absolute rat's nest. And that falls at the feet of the administration, perhaps at the president's feet himself. Certainly putting Mike Flynn in as the original NSA was a bad idea. And then everything just got, the turd rolled downhill and picked up steam after that. So, that's really why we have what we have here. We have these never Trumpers marching over to the Capitol into the basement Soviet bunker of Inquisition, where Adam Schiff is conducting these Soviet-style hearings where he alone will decide what the witness answers and doesn't answer. He alone will decide what is leaked to the media and what is not. He alone will decide what transcripts are released to fellow congressmen and women or not. So it is quite a phenomenal exercise in duplicity here, watching the Democrats talk about being open and transparent in this process. Well, now we know that this Halloween will be remembered as a preemption to a massacre next year at the ballot box because they have set themselves up for the American public to learn only the truth as it really is. So all the American people know now are the selective leaks that Adam Schiff and Nancy Pelosi have engineered into the media, and all too willing media to perpetuate these myths. And I think if you've noticed, there's no real concern coming out of the House Republican caucus because they are aware. They know what's going on. It is being monitored. It is not as if there's nobody down there. We've either got Jim Jordan, Mark Meadows, in the room for everything, or Lee Zeldin or Scott Perry. We've got people that are there. We've got people that are watching this whole thing. We've got a really good tactician in Steve Scalise, and we've got a pretty decent mouthpiece in Leader McCarthy. So none of them are they don't have a whole lot of consternation about what happened today. They are excited, actually. Most of the House staffers that you talk to are excited because they cannot believe that the Democrats sprung this trap. It is very politically unpalatable for most of the Democrat staffers who now must undertake this mission with a straight face. I don't think that there's any way in hell that this is going to be swallowed whole by the American people. This is an attempt to re-engineer what Mueller could not accomplish. And like I said, they have subjugated and kicked poor fat Jerry right down the ladder of importance, and where normally the Judiciary Committee would head up these types of hearings, specifically because, as Doug Collins said today, they won't even allow, Schiff will not even allow the members of the Intelligence Committee to ask the questions about the Intelligence Committee, or Intelligence Community rather, to the witnesses that are on the NSC that are coming before the body. So it's unbelievable. I mean, he's actually confining their testimony to an area where the Intelligence Committee has no predicate business overseeing. So it is quite fascinating. Collins is quite amused by this. Devin Nunes is not, having to be subjected to it. So none of these so-called transparent rules that'll be involved with the president's attorney perhaps being allowed into the room, or witnesses perhaps being called by the minority party, none of this stuff really kicks in the resolution until you get to the Judiciary Committee. And that's for a reason. They're going to allow Adam Schiff to keep defining the role of this investigation very much as if he was dressing up as Ken Starr. And we all know that if Adam Schiff is dressing up as something at home, it's not Ken Starr, and it's probably not a man. And so Adam Schiff is leading this very awkward one-man mission to kind of craft out his own narrative. It's very bizarre. It is the opposite of bipartisanship. It is the opposite of precedence. So we're all kind of functioning at a loss here to explain how much of a political risk this is. Now, if I'm President Trump, I continue to bash both process and substance. You stick with the fact that I've already released the entire transcript of the call. But you know what? If they want to take this, funereal tone in the House and talk about how in hushed voices this is a very serious undertaking for them and all this crap, it's really incumbent upon the president to speak in more humbled and grave tones about how damaging this will be to the executive branch in general, and all future presidents will now not be able to hold a single conversation with a foreign leader, and how this is not only a process violation of American trust in Congress right now, but it's also a violation of the Constitution. It is presidential harassment. It is not something that the courts should allow to continue. He should continue to push for every aspect of executive privilege that he possibly can, though it has become increasingly apparent to me that a lot of these people would rather just resign from the administration, like Morrison today, who was Vindman's boss on the NSC, and a Bolton guy that was brought in. I mean, they would rather resign and not have to go through the process of hiring an attorney for $100,000 and go through the subpoena fight. So what they're doing is they're accepting the offer to go and voluntarily speak before a closed door committee. Now, the things that they're saying now are being selectively leaked by Schiff. So one or two theoretically damaging comments that are made are not a direct correlation to what the president would be doing in a quid pro quo situation. None of them have direct knowledge of anything. And it doesn't change the matter of what the transcript reveals, which is no quid pro quo. So they've got a real problem here because there is no connection. There's no one person that was told that the Ukrainian money will be held until this happens. And that even privately would be problematic. And using Mulvaney's jumbled up words from a press conference, which he admittedly walked back because he confused everybody, they're not going to get that. Mulvaney's not going to have the John Dean moment where he shows up on national television before Adam Schiff in an open hearing and says, yes, I was instructed by the President of the United States that I had to withhold or direct the withholding of the Ukrainian military aid unless they investigate Burisma and Hunter Biden. No, it's not going to happen. It didn't happen. Won't happen. Sondland, who's already given testimony that it never happened, U.S. ambassador to the European Union, is not going to come back and perjure himself to what he already disclosed to the Intelligence Committee behind closed doors in the Soviet basement bunker. So we've got an issue here. You've got an issue if you're Adam Schiff. You cannot tie the president directly to any of these comments about Ukrainian aid being held quid pro quo for an investigation into Burisma or Hunter Biden. It's in fact not something that's going to occur because it would only be able to occur if Mick Mulvaney or Sondland would change his story, or John Bolton marches in there next Thursday and says, with like part of a tuna sandwich on that disgusting walrus mustache of his. Unless he says something like, yeah, the president blatantly told somebody that, and it was me. So if Bolton goes in and says, yeah, I was a witness to this meeting that Vindman talked about with two Ukrainian envoy representatives of Zelensky's administration, where Sondland made some kind of awkwardly phrased statement about no aid will be forthcoming or no White House visit will be forthcoming unless you investigate Burisma, Hunter Biden, or the secret server from the 2016 election interference. That is not a point of emphasis that you can bring to the American people. That's already being breathlessly reported by the Democrat drive-by media, and that's not something that the American people don't already just assume happened. So you need a shock. You need a shock, which is shock the conscience is a phrase that Sean Hannity likes to use. So shock the conscience of that's the kind of thing that sparks the imagination of the American public. That's the kind of thing that can move intrigue on impeachment to a real factual crisis. That type of shock would need to be the president of the United States was aware that he had, 6 or 7 guys called the plumbers unit that broke into the Watergate Hotel office of the DNC or the the election office for McGovern. So, this whole thing has to have a hook like that. Oh, by the way, there's tapes. So when Butterfield went over and told the Senate that there were tapes of every conversation that the president had in the Oval Office, that was a big moment. The American public was like, that caught their attention. Now, in 1998, you had to shock the conscience, and shocking the conscience did not consist of Bill Clinton being exposed as a dog. They already knew he was a hound dog. Matter of fact, his own lawyers described him as a hound dog. But that is not the issue. What shocked the American conscience at that point was the semen stain left on a blue dress that was worn by Monica Lewinsky in the Oval Office during an overt sexual encounter that they had, and the president had denied under oath had occurred, where he had denied categorically being alone at any time in the White House with Monica Lewinsky. I sure as hell hope he was alone when he expended his manhood or his essence onto her blue dress, and then it got into the cigar being penetrated in a sexual fashion. So this is the issue. This is the issue. I am wondering what's going to shock the American conscience into... Now, keep in mind that despite all of this evidence, it wasn't until Butterfield told the Senate Watergate Commission that there were tapes that Nixon could be revealed to obstructing or committing other crimes. And it wasn't until that the American people even knew that President Clinton had lied that things really got cooking. And neither one of those things materialized the way that the Democrats hoped that it would. And it wasn't until that the Supreme Court was unanimously in decision that the president needed to turn over all the remaining missing minutes of tape, and or he faced obstruction of Congress and obstruction of justice charges for certain. And that's the way things went in 1974 when it finally came down to the resignation of Richard Nixon. In 1998, all of this is happening right as a preface, right at the preface of an election season going into a midterm election. The Starr report gets turned over in early October to the Judiciary Committee in the House. They huddle together with the Democrats to come up with rules to engage impeachment proceedings, and they were bipartisan. It was a bipartisan effort that, okay, so this has got to happen now because obviously, President Clinton in a little blue dress, we have to do something. So the Democrats, in their wisdom at that point, decided that they wanted to be part of the game rather than left out. So they construct rules together in a bipartisan way where the president would be able to have his members in Congress call witnesses on his behalf in the Judiciary Committee. These would be televised hearings. There would be open access to lawyers throughout the process for witnesses. All of this stuff was decided in a more bipartisan fashion. I could say that because there was no bipartisanship at all in what happened today. So, like I said, there is no predicate shock of the conscience here. So, as Jason Schiff has said today on the painful Outnumbered, which is it's a horrible production on Fox. It was terrible to watch. And Harris Faulkner, I'm surprised she can find her way home after leaving the studio. But Jason said this is a quintessential fishing expedition where the Democrats They are moving forward into these uncharted waters, and they're casting in a hook to try to catch something. Very dangerous. I mean, you've essentially gone out way past where, you should possibly go. It's like watching that damn Perfect Storm movie with George Clooney. It's like, okay, we're going to the Flemish Cap. Okay, you're going all the way out to the Flemish Cap. Okay, we're going out to the Flemish Cap. And as you know, yeah, they caught a bunch of swordfish, and then the refrigeration unit breaks down, and they have to make a decision: wait out the storm and the fish rot, or go through the storm and try to make it back and set the market. Well, here's the thing. If you've never seen The Perfect Storm, it's a decent movie. I suggest you watch it, but it's based on a real story. And these sailors actually decide, you know what, let's go get our big payday. Let's go out to the Flemish Cap and drive it back, go through the storm. This is where the Democrats have put themselves. It's very problematic because you're going out to the Flemish Cap and you know there's a political storm on the horizon. You know that it's a political election season for your Democrat nomination candidates for president. It's very dangerous. It's very dangerous because you have no smoking gun. You have no shock to the American conscience. And let me tell you this. I'll tell you this about Donald Trump. It will take a substantial smoking gun to shock the American conscience when it comes to Donald J. Trump. Because, frankly, he's already done that. We are desensitized to the fact that he is a gruff, impolitic, undiplomatic person. We're already in receipt of that knowledge. All of us each in our own way, Democrats, Independents, and Republicans. We all know, and in some cases, our cases mostly, we appreciate the fact that he is a little rough around the edges. And certainly there is not going to be any evidence forthcoming that the president is in direct or written form telling anyone, authorizing that this only happens if this happens, which means quid pro quo is if it's a quid, you gotta have a quo. And if there's no quo and the Ukrainians didn't know that the money was being held and the Ukrainians had no idea that a visit to the White House was contingent upon opening up these investigations, then how the hell is this impacting the 2020 election? That doesn't add up. So, if anything, it's about the 2016 election. I suggest that the president stick with that narrative that this is about cleaning up corruption in Ukraine. It's also about uncovering the corruption of the 2016 investigation into me, which was illegal. Now, why should he continue to hammer that? He should continue to hammer that because the Horowitz report is coming. Not only is the Horowitz report coming, the John Durham investigation is unfolding. So what I talked about in the past is still true, that this is a muddy the water ventures where the Democrats can try to preemptively get ahead of all this in some capacity. And it makes no sense otherwise. It makes zero sense otherwise to give the political calculus on this is mind-numbing. It doesn't add up to a fruitful result for the Democrats to do this with the amount of information that they have, which is insignificant. So, yeah, the only way politically that this makes any sense is that they're looking to muddy up the waters so that they can say, yeah, well, Trump did this, after they're exposed for what they've done. Now, if I'm the president, I said this 1,000 times. I'm just going to wasting my breath here, but I'm going to say it again. If I'm the president, I can do my tweets. I keep them brief because they are now considered evidence as they always were, but more than ever, the public will be looking at whatever the president says and using it as if he were testifying before a committee. I believe he should stick with the one-line tweets like read the transcript, that type of thing. I think continuing to call his Zelensky conversation perfect is a bit obtuse when we've already got this far down the road with the impeachment proceedings. So I believe he should not appear contrite because this is something that weighed heavily on the Clinton White House, is how do we admit that we kind of let this get away from us a little bit and we were inappropriate and maybe not entirely truthful, but we didn't technically lie. And that's not something Americans really like to hear, but they do like the contrition part of the whole thing. So I don't expect Trump to acknowledge that he could have handled this better. That's something that his surrogates will eventually put forward to the American people when it gets closer to voting time on the impeachment itself, on the articles itself. So what they require now, in addition to a smoking gun, is all of this information needs to be unearthed prior to it going to Judiciary Committee. So all of this must be unearthed in this newly crafted odd constitutional contraption here that they're carving out for themselves, that the Intelligence Committee is now undertaking a investigation into the president, which they will report to judiciary. So that's really why they had to pass this resolution, because it's so out of the box, the realm of imagination, and with zero precedence, that they had to have something to convince the courts. Inevitably, when we get to the subpoena fights that are coming, and the executive privilege over information fight that is coming, that is going to be the sole reason and retort or legal rejoinder that they can give, the Congress can give the Federal Appeals Court, will be, yeah, well, we're doing an impeachment proceeding. See, look, it's official and everything. I think a lot of discerning judges will look upon this as something of a new creation, and they will be very cautious with this, and they will probably issue that caution in their statements, in their decision, and they will do it in print, and we will point to it and use it as a roadmap to winning the battle when it gets to the Supreme Court. So my level of concern is no higher than it was 3 weeks ago, as far as actual impeachment is concerned. My level of concern politically has dropped dramatically, because now I see, for the first time in a long time, I see the roadmap directly back into the majority. So, it's very tough for Republicans to craft a message. It really hasn't happened since the original Newt idea of the contract with America. It's really tough to do that as Republicans, to come out in favor of certain policies, because spending's out of control. We're not making any spending cuts. Tax cuts are not a popular thing with the middle class and the lower class white males that we need to vote for us. So it's really tough. We certainly can't talk about healthcare. We can't go on the trail and talk about that. So the Republicans, my fear was that it's hard enough to knock an incumbent out of office, but it's really hard to do it unless you have a singular message like the Democrats had in 2018, saying this individual is a Trump sycophant, and they voted to take away protections in the ACA for people with pre-existing conditions, which was a technical truth, but not really, because it was never taken up in the Senate. So, you need that type of hammered message. And when I say that, I mean, trust me, I've been doing this a long time. So before you listen to these other faceless, anonymous, who knows what they've done for their living, for their life, before you listen to these strange people out there, you just take my word for it when I say that you need a consistent message. You need to hammer it, and we've got it now. We've got it now, regardless of what happens. And here's my prediction. Like I said, I'm not shy about making predictions. I'm going to make one right now. That if they do not materialize with their big swordfish haul, and they can't get through the political storm back to set the market, back to my perfect storm analogy, I would say that they will not move forward with an actual impeachment vote. They will try to negotiate a grave censure. So they will try to move towards a censure of the president, and then they'll try to run on that and say, you know what, this isn't the best thing for the country, so we're going to remark gravely upon this imposition upon the rights of the American people and the rogue acts by this president by doing a grave censure of the president. And then, of course, censoring the president is a pretty big fucking deal. It was, back in the day when they did it to Andrew Jackson, or almost did it to Andrew Jackson. I can't even fucking remember. So, pardon my language. Here's the deal. They think that that's their way out. And I'm just guessing that by talking to some of my Democrat friends. And yes, I do have Democrat friends. And I think that they view this as harmful to Trump's character, to the image of him being presidential. That's what they fear the most. They fear that Trump will be viewed as presidential and strong, and that we're killing terrorists, that we're making progress in some geopolitical issues, on trade issues. So what they're doing is they're creating an imbalance. They're creating a vacuum here. And I predicted a few weeks ago, I've been getting lucky here. I should play the lottery. You have seen what? You have seen Turkey push the limits of what they could do into Syria. That's already happened. So now Erdogan might be wondering if he can push this ceasefire into a little more dangerous territory than what he originally agreed to with Pompeo and Pence, and looking at the political volatility of our situation. Now, you've seen recently, as of today, China is taking a different tone towards our so-called phase one trade deal and or probable long-term deal. So we've got the market reacting negatively to some of the China comments. But of course, China's pushing back on this front because they think they can get away with it with the volatility in the American political spectrum. And another thing, what else did you see reported today? Way down on the websites, you see that the fat little man down in North Korea is firing off new ballistic missile tests down there because he too is coming out with stronger language. And I need a sip of Powerade here. As you can tell, I had 6 cups of coffee since this morning while overviewing this whole thing on television. The fat little rocket man is now firing off more rockets and saying that he's about done dealing with the U.S. because he's not getting any concessions. And why is he saying this now? Well, he's saying it now because we have political volatility on the home front. So, Trump is going to have to deal with this. The American people need to conceptualize for themselves what the Democrats have put into motion. They are destabilizing the country. They seek to destabilize our geopolitical relationships. And in coupling with that, they seek to destabilize our economic picture worldwide and at home in the markets. So how are the American people going to feel if whatever the Democrats are undertaking begins to cause erosion of U.S. foreign policy and begins to cause erosion in consumer confidence in the markets at home and see their 401ks go down based upon what's occurring, which is another thing that the president's trying to suggest. I don't think he should hammer it too much, but he can continue to hammer it just a little bit. That I think he should lay off Chairman Powell because, one, the average American doesn't even understand what the Fed is. The average American doesn't understand what it means to have your interest rates cut by a quarter of a basis point. They don't understand any of that shit. And even if they did, they don't understand the impacts on the overall economy. So you are preaching into thin air, into an audience of a few people who are already aware of everything politically. If you understand the economic impact of the Federal Reserve, if you understand the impacts of what these board governors are saying about raising or freezing or dropping the rate levels, then you already understand almost anything, probably. You already understand all the dynamics of political affairs domestically and probably foreign as well. So the president needs to stop doing that because it's uncommon presidential behavior. It's not presidential if you're going to use it as a measuring stick throughout history. Leave the Fed, just leave it alone. Fact is, they gave you another quarter point drop. Fact is, we're going to want another one in January. So I don't understand, you're not going to bully them into it. We've already got a couple of governors who are very uncomfortable with the cuts. I'm not in favor of continuing down this road. I'm not going to belabor it much more than that because the president's not going to listen to me anyway. So I think he needs to talk about substance over process a little bit more. Let his surrogates talk about how this is harmful to the country, harmful for our negotiations on trade deals, harmful for getting anything through Congress. The Congress is now, majority party is now attempting to persuade the American people that they in fact are passing laws to the Senate and the Senate's not passing them. So now that's kind of a ridiculous notion. The president needs to hit them and hit them hard on the USMCA. The president needs to hit them and hit them hard on the prescription drug cost reduction program. This has to be something that he takes a stand on, and he needs to stay presidential when we're dealing with the fallout of anything that occurs in the Middle East. That absolutely cannot be touched. That absolutely has to be the playbook, page number 1. Now, the president's not going to do that. So that makes it very difficult. And I've said before, to the people that are criticizing the president about not having a war room and this and that, he could have a war room for the last 2 months and we wouldn't know about it simply because he doesn't take the advice of those who are inside the war room. So here's the deal. The Democrats today put forth a rules resolution to define the process of impeachment. It was an impeachment resolution. Don't take anybody else's word for it. It was an impeachment proceedings resolution. It was voted through without a single member of the Republican Party even vociferously supportive, but while voting no. There was no equivocation. The only equivocating going on were two Democrats from monster Trump margin victories in 2016 in northern Minnesota and southern Jersey, who are done Dom Turkey anyway in 2020. They voted against the rules. Pelosi had to take the undignified step of voting for the resolution herself as Speaker, which is considered nauseating to most people that are political observers. And they had to rely on little pissed off Justin Amash, who calls himself an independent, and he's already said he's not running again. Well, he would have lost by a historic margin in the primary had he tried to do so. So we've got this issue in the Senate where McConnell and Lindsey Graham have undertaken this heroic effort to tell the House of Representatives that this process is a sham. Nothing changes today that wasn't yesterday. This is the point that Congress is going to continue to make in the minority. They're going to nothing changes. These rules have changed nothing. So they have given no transparency, no powers to the minority. Everything is still subject to the approval of the majority chairman. It is in no way, shape, or form comparable to anything that occurred in 1973 or 1998, meaning you don't have a roadmap forward, and it's bizarre, and it throws everybody out of their atmosphere. So the Senate has said the incredible step of 50 jurors, that's what you call senators in the concept of impeachment. 50 jurors are telling the prosecutor in this case that they will, in no uncertain terms, not accept anything that is the fruit of such an investigation. So, prior to swearing in as jurors, which they must do in the Senate, by the way, and I'll explain in my last 15 minutes, I will explain the Senate process once the House, if they do make the suicidal journey into passing actual articles of impeachment. Says there's some point of contention about the McConnell's going to change the rules. Okay. All right. Whatever. I'll get to that in the last 10 minutes. But the process now is very, very muddied because the Senate has told them that this is not okay. So you're basically dealing with 50 unequivocal no's and knowing that you need 2/3, and don't listen to anybody who tells you it's 2/3 members present in the Senate, as if the gravest responsibility of any senator in the history of the United States, they're going to miss the vote. Oh, I'm sorry. My niece is getting baptized. I can't make the vote on the articles of impeachment. I'm having an appendectomy. I'd love to be there, but I can't. I can't negotiate intellectually with people who are that dumb. If you're that dumb and you're actually positing as an argument that anyone in the Senate, Democrat or Republican or the lone independent, the idiotic Mr. King, that any of them would miss or be allowed to, by either leadership, miss a vote of going on record for impeachment, you might be a retard. To borrow from Jeff Foxworthy, you might be a retard. And I know that's an insensitive word, but I don't know how else to describe someone who would abruptly end cognition at the point of sense. So that would actually mean that it was a retarded notion because your cognition was stunted, stopped, past the point of thought. Therefore, it is a retarded notion to say that anyone in the Senate would not be present. It's dumb. And if you follow anybody who says that, then that makes you dumb as well. But by extension, you're in receipt of things that will continue to dampen your knowledge. And if it's dampened, you're dumbing it down, which, if you want to simplify it, it is in concise matters dumb. So if you want to take exception with my language, then at least look at the derivative of the terms that I'm using here. So the Senate will be in receipt of articles of impeachment, provided they get 2 or 3 articles of impeachment, provided they get this over into the Senate. The Senate will be in receipt of probably 10 to a dozen House managers, they're called, and the managers are essentially a team of prosecutors that the House sends over from the majority party, and they try the case before the Senate. Now, here, let's talk about this notion that the Senate has rules, okay, that the Senate could change the rules if this actually does happen, that McConnell may surreptitiously have a plan to change the rules to enact some, secret mission to remove Donald Trump, which is of itself, again, dumb. And there's no other word for it. So his political fortunes are tied to the president. So there's no way to remove the president or facilitate the removal of a president and win re-election in Kentucky. Regardless of whether or not you were successful. Say that he went off and had a stroke, and McConnell has a stroke, and nobody knows, but the blood vessels and the capillaries in his brain have burst, and it's affecting his frontal lobe, and he can't think straight, and he decides, hell, I'm going to go on a suicide mission too, and I'm going to, work to remove President Trump. Well, okay, say you were even successful in finding, more than a dozen Republicans to join you on that mission. Say you found 16 or 15 people that were going to do this with you. And they were going to commit career suicide. Maybe they all had strokes. I don't know. But they would still lose their states. What is this? You're going to run President Mike Pence and you're going to win Kentucky? You're going to win Arizona? You're going to win Iowa? No, of course not. It's stupid. It's dumb. It's dumb. So I'm not going to really belabor that point. If you believe that, it's a retarded notion. So I don't want to define you as a person, but I will define the fact that your cognition has stopped prior to the point of sense. Therefore, it was stunted and retarded. So that is a retarded concept to say that there's any possibility that Mitch McConnell is going to secretly adopt some rules. Now, it would take a simple majority to change the rules. It has happened, I believe, once in modern history, which was pointed out in some pre-Iran-Contra ridiculous amendment to the rules, which passed the Senate, I believe, unanimously, which basically talked about decoupling or trying to decouple a single article of impeachment. It was what you call a technical amendment. Now, rules are one thing. Rules of the chamber are written down. They are codified. They are sanctioned. They are sanctimonious. Procedures are different. See, now this is the problem. When you run into people on Twitter who think they know what they're talking about, they think they know what rules are versus what procedures are, that's when you run into a problem of negotiating an intellectual exchange with somebody like that when they're here and you're up here. It's very difficult to communicate. So procedures, of course, are discussed in a bipartisan fashion in the Senate. So much like things between Daschle and Trent Lott, they were discussed. They huddled and they decided what they were going to do, and they decided to table even calling witnesses initially because they didn't know how serious they were even going to take the process. So they move forward. The Constitution provides that the Senate has sole power to actually litigate impeachment. So they try the impeachment, prosecute. They do not have a choice. If the articles of impeachment are passed, the House presents it to the Senate. They come over actually in the form of, as I said, House managers. They bring it and they tell the Senate exactly what's up. The Senate is in receipt of articles of impeachment. They must, as a constitutional duty, they must convene as a trial body. What does that mean? It means that 100 senators will now be called before the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States, who will preside, who will be marched into the chamber by 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats, and he will march up and he will sit up there in the dais and he will say, "You must come before me and swear an oath." Swear an oath as a juror. In addition to any oath that you have taken to serve your office, there is an additional affirmation made before the Supreme Court Chief Justice in the body of the Senate by each senator, and they must sign it, that they will be absolutely, nonpartisan and look at everything like a juror would. That actually happens, okay? And you must have 2/3 on any articles of impeachment. That's in the Constitution. You can't change those rules. And any rules that you want to change that are already rules in the Senate require 51 votes to do so. So that's not going to happen either unless it's a bipartisan process. And let me tell you this, anybody who gets on the wrong side of bipartisanship over there in the rules and procedures in the Senate is going to find themselves in the crosshairs. They don't need to do that. McConnell is going to function as the opposing polar opposite of Nancy Pelosi. He's going to do so by giving them rope and giving them rope and giving them rope. And we're going to have senators like Lindsey Graham take the helm. We're going to have senators like Ron Johnson rise up. We're going to have senators that are going to pick apart everything the House managers are doing. Now, they're going to send over Adam Schiff. They have to send Adam Schiff over. Jerry Nadler will probably be leading the House manager over. Do you know how Adam Schiff got into office? Here's a fun little bit of trivia for you as we wrap things up. Because I know my Twitter adversaries out there don't know shit about how Adam Schiff got into Congress. Do you know how Adam Schiff got into Congress in 2000? Does anyone know? Does anyone know? Does anyone know? Does anyone know how Adam Schiff was elected? Why he was elected in a traditionally, historically Republican seat in California? Why did he beat Jim Rogan by a pretty wide margin in 2000? I can tell you right now why he beat Jim Rogan in 2000. He beat Jim Rogan because Jim Rogan was a leading vocal proponent of impeaching William Jefferson Clinton. He was a prosecutor by trade. He was a prominent member of the House managers who went to prosecute the impeachment articles before Senate. And for his efforts, Jim Rogan was handily defeated by Adam Schiff for being crazy enough to go and try to force through impeachment after getting murdered at the polls in 1998 for even suggesting a hint of doing so. All of this occurred after the election. After the election. There was no impeachment vote prior to the election. It was the mere hint. It was the mere process of impeachment that led to people like Jim Rogan losing their election. And the irony here is that is how Adam Schiff got into office, by attempting to prosecute William Jefferson Clinton as a House manager in the Senate. Jim Rogan lost to none other than Adam Schiff. Now there is an interesting little parcel of history that I bet you didn't know. And I know for sure that all these little know-it-alls on Twitter did not know. Why? Because they don't study this shit. They haven't lived it, drank it and ate it and shit it for 20 years like I have. So, and they also want to hide their face and their name and what they've done for a living. So, again, this is a suicidal mission, politically speaking. I see no path to victory here for the Democrats. Certainly no path for removal of the president. And the president should not get agitated to the point where he thinks that this is a likelihood. It is, of course, it is a near zero likelihood. We already have 50 senators led by Lindsey Graham, a true and traditional ally as you could ever have in the Senate for the president. Lindsey Graham has absolutely outpaced any expectations that I've had for him. And for all those who are waiting for Lindsey Graham to call some kind of damning committee meeting that's going to interfere with the House's process, you don't know anything about politics. And you do not, as the Senate, step on this process, because then you are jumping into the process argument and you're taking it away from the House Republicans. The House Republicans cannot assert that they're being boxed out and deprived of due process, and you have Lindsey Graham hammering in a judiciary meeting and calling before witnesses that are already testifying in a House impeachment proceeding. That is not how it works. And you will be excoriated by the press, and rightfully so. They're waiting, lying in wait, much like a lion watching the antelope play. They are, whatever that animal is over there on the African continent version of it. And I will tell you that they're going to get their meal in the Senate. They're going to call forth everybody and including Adam Schiff himself as a witness. We won't even have to because he'll be one of the prosecutors as a House manager. And he will be picked and plucked like an overripe piece of fruit, and everything that they've done will be exposed. And all of this will happen subsequently after the impeachment process has gone forward, and then it will go in conjunction with the release of further damning Horowitz reports, further damning investigation leaks from the overall investigation into the 2016 election interference led by John Durham. They will, and that'll feed into what Lindsey Graham does separately outside of impeachment. He will continue to call in all of these people, and it'll just expose everything that was done against the president, and it'll be a total disaster for the Democrats. And that'll be the last thing that the public taste prior to going into an election. And it'll be the first thing that the senators running for president must deal with. They will be stuck, chained to their desk as jurors for the entire month of January at minimum. And that is when the Nevada caucuses happen. That is when the Iowa vote happens. So this is a terrible timing, a terrible subject matter. It does not jibe with anything that the American people want to see, but it does jibe with a very firm portion of the base that the Democrats have. So their presidential candidates cannot move away, shift away from the impeachment process, because they risk losing that portion, that rabid, pussy hat wearing portion of the Democrat base. It's an unwinnable situation. It's absolutely a suicide mission that Nancy Pelosi undertook today. And with it, they will tank the Biden nomination. They absolutely cannot move forward with Biden while he is being raked over the coals with his family. And now we're finding some due diligence reporting by right-wing publications, obviously conservative ones, that are digging through and seeing that, you know what, it looks like Joe Biden was monetizing his brother and his son and their lobbying efforts even as a senator prior to becoming the vice president of the United States. God knows what will be unearthed over the next 8 years, where Hunter Biden and his brother, Joe Biden's brother, they were both living and thriving monetarily off of Joe Biden's office. He has made calls. He has interfered. He is on tape, taking credit for the firing of the Ukrainian prosecutor. Why is that important? It's because Vindman went into the secret Soviet bunker the other day, and he said that he tried to make edits to the call, and one of those edits were that the president was saying Biden was recorded interfering with the investigations into Ukraine. And they're acting like this is a new development. This is not a new development. I don't have any doubt that the president brought it up. It's because the president is concerned that he heard the recording that everyone else has seen of Biden blatantly bragging about getting this guy fired in a quid pro quo. You're not getting the money. You're not getting the money unless this guy's fired. By the way, I'm leaving here in 6 hours. So the answer is no unless you do it. And then he said, son of a bitch, lo and behold, they fired him. So this is an actual recording of him at a conference bragging about a quid pro quo with none other than the Ukraine. To say that's problematic is probably a bit of an understatement. To say that it hasn't been covered adequately by the press is probably the understatement of the year. All of this stuff will continue to be poured out, and it'll perforate the American conscience, including the hot mic moment with Obama telling the Russians that he will consider pulling out some of the missile technology in Europe at the behest of Russia, but only after he's reelected, which is a quid pro quo. So there is two types that are caught on record with audio and visual. Undeniable quid pro quo situations, undeniable abuses of authority by a president. This will not bode well politically for them justifying removing a president. The odds of the president being removed after today are the exact same as they were yesterday prior to this vote, and that was about 1%. So I don't know about you, but I don't sit around and worry about the 1% probability in my day, which would be me winning my state lottery while getting hit and struck by lightning on the same day. That's about the probability of what's going to happen with removal of the president. The Senate has done its job in a very incremental and successful, stealthy way. I love everything about the way McConnell's got this thing set up. I love how we are protecting the interests of the vulnerable senators. But let me tell you this. Let me be unequivocal about this. There is no scenario that I foresee more than one vote for any impeachment article of the President of the United States. And I think Lamar Alexander, a retiring senator, is a threat to maybe throw out. And if you go back to 1998, you see a bunch of senators like Senator Shelby, Senator Stevens. You had Republicans that voted, not guilty and guilty on the two articles. So you had one or the other. You had people splitting the baby out there. So I don't have any problems knowing that Lamar Alexander will let Doug Jones off the hook for one of the charges, and they'll flip-flop on him. But it still regards, it's 20 votes short. They will be 20 votes short of removal no matter what happens, and that is just baked into the whole scenario, carved into stone. So I look at this whole thing and I find it laughable that people are attacking the Senate. If you see people attacking the Senate, by all means, stop following them, mute them, do whatever you got to do to make yourself a little more sane. But I'm really not interested in getting trapped in any of these stupid little Twitter wars. So don't at me. If you want to tell somebody they're wrong and they are wrong, just why are you tagging me in it? I don't want to be in it. So, I'm going to be right and they're going to be wrong, but that's not something I want to be a party to, because I use my own face, my own name, and I have my own brand and I have my own record of predictions. And that's something I'm comfortable with. I don't want it to be weighed in comparison to somebody else's who's obviously not done this for a living, who's obviously not studied this, who's obviously not connected to the people in the decision-making world of politics that I am. So, I'm really not interested in it. I can just tell you that you're wrong, and it's pretty funny that you would attempt to impugn the credibility preemptively of the Senate, the same Senate that will be preserving this president, and will be putting out a final statement to the United States of America and its voting citizens that there was a total rigged process and that the president in no way committed anything close to an impeachable offense. And that, in conjunction with everything else that'll be coming forward from Horowitz and Durham, which may not rise to a criminal level either, but certainly will skew the public's vision and view of what happened and how Trump got into office and what happened after he got into office. So it's kind of a big deal. So everything is set up for us to have a path back to majority in the House. It allows a deliberation in the Senate to give Cory Gardner and McSally and Joni Ernst and Susan Collins and Tom Tillis. It gives them a chance to kind of act as if they're going to be jurors. They're already on record saying that this is a problematic process. So clearly it's going to take a huge jump, a huge smoking gun. It's going to take 18 minutes of missing tape. It's going to take a semen stain on a blue dress to shock the American conscience to the point of getting a Republican senator willing to commit political suicide. So we should all welcome this Halloween treat presented to us. It is a treat what Nancy Pelosi did today to Republicans. It is a trick to the Democrats. So here on Halloween, the obligatory Halloween metaphor is for the day: trick or treat, trick to the Democrats. They have tripped the trap. It is not good. It is a treat for the Republicans who now have the NRCC has a clear path, a clear mission to raise money and to hammer these 30 or so Democrat freshmen that reside in a Trump won district. It is just an absolute boon for us. We needed it. And now we just hammer them. We hammer them not only on process, we hammer them on substance. We applaud what the Senate has done thus far. And we recognize if we do have enemies, their names are Richard Burr, Mitt Romney, Lamar Alexander, Elisa Murkowski. These are our enemies. Our allies are Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell. And if you can't see that, again, your thoughts have stopped prior to reaching a sensical point, which means your thoughts have been retarded, meaning its progress was stunted, retarded. So there is the derivative of what I'm trying to explain to you. So I'm not categorizing anybody who believes an opposing view as a retard. I'm merely saying that their cognitive processes have stunted and they don't see what's really going on. So again, I will be proven right, as I usually am. I humbly declare that to be the case. I will, I don't know when I'm coming on. I mean, if people really want to do this Twitch thing tonight, maybe we do a little bit of it. I'm not sure. I've said my piece probably for the day, but I'll see you on Saturday night. Again, if you want to hear more of my perspective and get question and answer time in, that happens on YouTube. It is a MAGA Coalition search. You click on the MAGA Coalition YouTube channel, and then you hit the little bell and subscribe, and you will hear me on Saturday and Tuesday. Occasionally, I will jump on news breaking days, such as today, and go off on my coffee-addled rant about what I see and what I hear. So with that, I bid you adieu. I'm heading out. Went a little longer than I wanted to, as usual.